As summer winds down, something begins to shift. We begin to dream of new beginnings, new routines, new rhythms. Now is the perfect time for making all things new, so that we might rediscover what truly matters: life, peace, purpose, Jesus. As we step into the season ahead, let us do so not in routine, but in rhythm.
Well, each week in our staff meeting on Tuesday mornings, we have staff meetings. And to start our time together, we always ask a question to help get our conversation started. And it felt super appropriate that this was the question that we asked this week. What is a part of your daily routine that you look forward to every day? So as we've been talking about rhythms and routines, some of the folks who were sitting around the table with us, we had all sorts of different ways of reflecting and thinking about our days. One person, Pastor Jen, said that her favorite part of her day is her morning coffee with her husband, John, before the whole day begins and before things get crazy. Zach, you can see his sweet baby Charlie. He was sharing that it's when he first wakes up in the morning and looking at Charlie. And Tom was sharing that, he's like, it sounds a little kind of funny, but he said, we love watching Everybody Loves Raymond. So sort of like concluding the day with like a little something fun, a little something to decompress. I asked the community too, like, what's something that you love every day? And one woman who is in the midst of recovery said, I start every morning saying, please God, keep me sober. Not my will, but yours be done. And then she said, at the end of the day, I say, thank you, God, for another day of sobriety. Another woman shared that her favorite thing to do is to open up Facebook and look at the birthdays. She puts them immediately in her calendar and reaches out to people. And then she also looks back on all of the memories that she's had in the past years. And all of these habits, these routines, these things that we do, they shape our lives in more ways than we probably realize. Maybe it's something that helps us feel a little more centered, or maybe just something fun and silly that helps us to have joy and find life in the midst of what can be crazy days. Annie Dillard famously said this. She said, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And so I wonder, what do your days say about you? What do they reflect about the things that you value, what your priorities are, and how you might be called to live your life? So as we start this new sermon series over the next few weeks, we're going to be taking some time to reflect not just on our days, day in and day out, but really, what are some of our rhythms and our routines, the things that we do that help to shape who we are? How can we create rhythms that align with our values and our priorities and ultimately help us to find peace and joy and a sense of fulfillment? And we're going to do so as a way of looking through not only just what others might imagine as opportunities and ways to reflect on new rhythms and routines, but how Jesus invites us to do so. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about this author in a moment. I read this book, and it was called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. You can show the picture. And John Mark Comer described a way of reading the Gospels that forever changed the way that I looked at them. He said, when you read the Gospels, I want to invite you to read them like you would a biography, which I'd never really thought about before. And he went on to say, if you have someone that you admire, you might pick up their biography. You might start to read it and say, well, first off, what are some of the things that they have said that are really impactful that I might like to remember and incorporate into my life? You also might look at what are some of their daily habits and routines. What are some of the things that they do day in and day out? And if you want to emulate their life, you might say, I'd like to start doing some of those things. I thought I would look at some of the rhythms and routines of my children's favorite people. My son loves LeBron James. He loves the Lakers. And so I said, well, what does LeBron James do all the time? So he wakes up early. My son also wakes up early. But he begins his day with a workout. Not my son. He does not want to take the dog for a walk. I've tried all the things. He doesn't do that. But what I will say is that LeBron James also really values sleep. He'll take an afternoon nap every now and again, and he will make sure that he gets a full night's rest. My son can fall asleep at the drop of a hat. So he's got that in tow. And then I looked at what about Taylor Swift? So she's this incredible musician. And what I love is, was I was reading about her, is that she spends a lot of time every day just honing her craft. So every day spends time writing lyrics to songs and really spends time getting to really reflect on it. And when she feels stuck, she goes for a walk. My daughter Poppy, last night, the day was over and she said, can we go walk Nugget? So we did, we walked Nugget, and we just happened to make our way to the ice cream shop and just had to get some ice cream. Now, I don't know if Taylor Swift gets ice cream at the end of the day, but we do in our family. But as you think about these people that you admire, you try and do the things that they do because you, on some subconscious level, think, well, if I have a chance to adopt their habits, if I start doing the things that they do, perhaps my life might become like theirs. John Mark Comer, in that book that I showed you a moment ago, he says this: we copy the details because we know that the person you will eventually become is the cumulative effect of those tiny, seemingly mundane, or even insignificant details that in the end function like compound interest and create a life. It's kind of a doozy of a sentence. But what I love about it is this sense that the small decisions that we make, they compound over one another. The ways that we live our life on a day in and a day out basis, they capture who we want to be and how we long to live our life. What I'd like to suggest today is that as followers of Jesus, instead of maybe spending more time looking at other biographies, we should read the Gospels and look at Jesus' life and say, what did he say? How did he live? What did he inspire? And how might his life be a reflection and an invitation to live like he lived? And that as we seek to live as he lived, that we too might experience what he did: peace and joy and hope and fulfillment. And so I thought I would take a snapshot, a day in the life of Jesus, and would begin to follow Jesus through this to help us get a sense of what did he do on a day in and day out basis. The day that I chose is from the Gospel of Matthew, the 9th chapter. And the reason I chose it is that it is the calling of Matthew. So Matthew is the gospel writer, and this is the moment in his life when everything changed. And I thought it would be a helpful perspective to say, if this is what Matthew saw and what he remembered on the very day that his life was forever changed, what might it say to us? So here's what we read on the 9th chapter. We read, and Jesus was walking along, and he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station, and he said to him, follow me. And he got up and followed him. What we notice across the next several verses of this chapter is that Matthew is now on the in crowd. He's now having an opportunity to see all the things that are happening to Jesus and the countless people who are coming to him, and in effect, the many questions that people have for Jesus. There are several questions that happen here, but I want to focus on one of the ones that come from John's disciples, because what I think it offers is an important reflection on what happens when we choose to live our life differently. Here's what we read from John's disciples. Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not? It seems like a simple question. To offer a bit of context, the disciples of John were John the Baptist's disciples, and they're speaking about the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were the religious leaders. Now, fasting was an incredibly important part of their life and their weekly rhythm. Twice a week they fasted. And this wasn't just something that they did because they wanted to do it. It was a practice that helps them to feel more deeply connected with God. And so they're coming to Jesus and saying, Jesus, we have for years done this thing that helps us feel more connected with God, but why don't your disciples do this? Why aren't they trying to fast so that they can find themselves coming closer to God? And here's what Jesus responds. He said to them, no one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old cloak, for the patch pulls away from the cloak, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into new wineskins. Otherwise, the skin bursts, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are ruined, but new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. Jesus often spoke in metaphors, and so as he's sharing with this to these group of people, What they're hearing is, okay, let me think a little bit about wine. Now, I will tell you that wine in the ancient East was not carried in a bottle, not bottles like we have right now to have wine. And wine was something, it was a regular beverage that they had all of the time at the table, and so it was of a natural and normal thing. But rather than having it in a bottle, they carried in something that was called a wineskin. Here's a picture that I found online of something as to which it would look like. Now, what you'll want to know about this is that it was made of hide of an animal. So it made it possible for them to have it be portable and to be able to maintain and keep the freshness. So when they poured the wine into these wineskins, what would happen is the wine would begin to ferment. And as it began to ferment, if you know anything about science, it kind of like bubbled a little bit and expanded. And when the new wine was put into a new wineskin, it allowed this, there was sort of an ability for it to expand and contract to fit and to fill the space that it had. But after a wine bag, a wineskin had been used once and was old, if you poured the wine out and put new wine in, it no longer had the same capacity to expand and contract. It had become rigid. It had lost its ability, its elasticity, its capacity to grow. And so what Jesus is sharing with them is they know this. Everyone knows you don't put new wine into old wineskins. And what he's telling them is that when something new is happening in your life, the container with which you have your life currently may not be able to fully expand into who you're called to be. In other words, there might be something in your life, in the lives of the Pharisees and the lives of John's disciples that had become rigid. This sort of container for how they had done things, which it wasn't that it was bad or that it was wrong, because clearly it had served its purpose, but now Jesus was doing something new. And the new thing that he was doing, the container for which they had been living their lives and the rigid and the structure, no longer allowed for room, no longer allowed for expansion, no longer allowed for something new to happen in their life. So as I was reading this and reflecting on my own life, I want to ask you a couple of questions. And my first is, what in your life is no longer working? Where in your life have you become rigid? This is the way that has to be done, the way that it needs to be done, that it's no longer allowing room for growth. What's no longer serving you? Maybe you're like me and find that I hold on to something for dear life because it's always seemed to work before, but now it doesn't seem to be working. And what that might be saying to you. Here's what I know. Spiritual transformation means that we have to be willing to embrace new things and practice a new way of living and stop trying to say, well, that's what I've always done before. And be willing to say, what would happen if I did something new? You see, the Pharisees were so focused on the ways that they'd done things before that they missed the Messiah was standing right in front of them. They were so focused on what they thought they needed to do that they missed out on an opportunity to live their lives differently. And what I love so much about Jesus is he's not just telling them something, he's actually taking actions to show them. Because what happens right after he's answering these questions is a practical, real-life world example of what to do when we are faced with these difficult decisions. And here's what happens. As he's having conversations and as he's connecting, the scripture says that he's interrupted. So he's talking and answering these questions, and he said, while he was saying these things, suddenly a leader came and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And then I want you to notice what happens next. Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. He didn't ignore them. He didn't say, just a moment, I have to finish what it is that I'm doing. I'm in the middle of a teaching. He got up and followed him to the place where he was needed the most. Just then, as he's on his way there, he receives another interruption, this time by another woman. Suddenly, a woman who'd been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, for she was saying to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be made well. And what does he do this time? He turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter, Your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. What I want you to notice is that not once, but twice, Jesus is interrupted. And both times, he stops what he's doing, and he spends time and addresses and connects with the thing that is right in front of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that I can be laser focused. I got things to do. I have things on my list. I live in a life that feels quite busy, and I'm not always paying attention. Sometimes it feels like my life is a little bit scattered, and I'm running from here and there. And I don't know if you're familiar with Alice in Wonderland. Maybe you are, but the sequel to Alice in Wonderland is Through the Looking Glass. And in it, there's this description of something that people have called the Red Queen effect. And it struck me as a way that we are currently living our lives, and maybe perhaps some of the way that I am. So Alice is in this world, and she's saying, "I keep running faster and faster, but I can't seem to catch up." And the queen talks to her and describes and says this. He says, "It takes all the running to keep in place, but if you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that." So here's this image of what it's like to say, I'm trying to get to the place where I'm going, but I don't feel like I can get there. And I've got to go twice as fast as I might normally go just to make any effort to move forward. And it kind of feels like that's the world that we live in. A lot of busyness, a lot of trying to do more and more and more and add more things without taking things away. My husband said to me just the other day, I had a big obligation that was taken off my calendar, and immediately I filled it with something new. And he's like, "Why do you have to always fill the space and time with something else?" And I was like, I'm type A. Like, space happens and I just fill it. And so I know I struggle with this. I struggle with creating space and time to allow for movement to happen and move on to the next thing. Perhaps was not really always paying attention to the things that matter most. Sometimes I feel like I'm on autopilot. Anybody ever gotten in their car and started driving and ended up at the place not where you were supposed to go, but you ended up at the grocery store because that's where you always go when you turn right here, and then you realize I was supposed to actually go pick up my kid at school, and so now I'm going to be late. Maybe just me. But we find ourselves kind of moving from one step to the next without truly taking time to pause and to reflect and to think about what matters most. I've been reading this book that's called Life Worth Living, and it's by Miroslav Volf as well as a few others. And in it, he describes 4 modes of being in the world. And I want to invite you to reflect and think about what these look like. The first is to be on autopilot. In other words, that's we're not aware of anything that we're doing. And to that, he answers or has this thought, this question says, we do what we do because that's what we do. We do what we do because that's what we do. We're on autopilot. There's no real thinking or reflection. We're just kind of living in and through it. The second level down of this mode of being is effectiveness. And we begin to reflect a little bit and we say, are my actions getting us where we want to go? In other words, the question is what we do getting us where we want? So I know where I want to be. Are the things that I'm doing getting me to that goal, to that place? The third is self-awareness. And this is where we say, I'm no longer really distracted by all these other things, but instead I want to take time and really say what matters most. So we ask the question, what do we really want? The final is self-transcendence, and it's saying, how do I guide and direct my life based on the desires of my heart? I think about Psalm 37, which says, that God will grant me the desires of my heart if I take delight in the Lord. And the question that we ask is, what is worth wanting? Now, I'm not going to say that we will probably live our life all the time on this idea of self-transcendence, but I wonder, what kinds of questions are you asking about yourself? Has this question of what is worth wanting ever found you questioning what it is that you're doing with your life? And where do you find yourself living the majority of your time? And how do these questions help you to imagine what changes might need to happen? As I think about the way that Jesus lived his life, he not only paid attention, but he also lived with intention. In other words, he saw someone, and he didn't just acknowledge it and see it, but he took it one step further and he did something about it. He took an action step. He healed the woman that was in front of him, but I don't want us to forget about the fact that he was on his way to go somewhere when he got stopped. And he didn't say, oh no, time is up, I've missed the opportunity, I can't go to see the other man's daughter. No, here's what happens next. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. Jesus didn't say, I waited too long. I can't go back and do the thing that I said that I wanted to do because too much time has passed. Insert whatever sort of reason you would choose not to do something that you said that you wanted to do or said that you were going to do. It's been too long. It's too hard. I just can't do it. Jesus said, it's never too late. And that's what I'll tell you, truthfully. It's never too late for you to take the step in the direction to do the thing that you know that you're being called to do that matters most in your life. Jesus not only says it, but he models it for us and invites us to do the same. And I wonder, maybe there's something that stopped you from doing something in the past. You feel like you missed the opportunity, but there's always a chance to pay attention and to live with intention. And I wonder what would happen if you did that. What would happen if you paid attention to the people that are around you and took it one step further and intentionally lived and connected with the people who are around you? And I'll share with you that something incredible has happened within this community, and that's with members of our community, Marshall and Stefan. We've got a picture of Miss Christie just this past weekend with Stefan. And they typically sit out in our Connect, and that's because Stefan, coming inside the sanctuary, the loudness and the lights can be a little overwhelming and overstimulating for him. So he and his mom typically sit out in the Connect, and they worship there and they connect there. And on a week in and week out basis, they'll have folks coming in and out and saying hi, and one of them is Steve Braden. And Steve is one of our regular volunteers, and oftentimes he would find himself volunteering downstairs. So if you came in and you parked on this side of the parking lot by Brookside Boulevard, sometimes you'll see Steve on his way in, which means he's a little late running into church because he's continuing to greet people. And every time he would come up, he would say hi and introduce himself to Marshall and Stefan, and the more that he talked with them, the more he got to know them. He said there were times that I might not even really make it into the sanctuary because I started having more and more conversations with them. And then something really fabulous happened, and that is Stefan was having a surprise birthday party. And so who did they invite? They invited Steve. Here's a couple of pictures of his birthday party. You can see him over on the left-hand side. That's him blowing out his candles. And then Debbie Powell, who's also a member of our church, is standing right behind him. You can't really see Steve. He's kind of like in the back, in the middle, as a part of all of the celebration. And Steve showed up. Because what began as just a hello, a connection, turned into something more, turned into a beautiful friendship. And then a week later, when Stefan was admitted in the hospital, they didn't call the pastor of the church to come visit. They called Steve. They said, hey, Steve, will you come and visit us? And he said, of course I will. And I only found out because Steve said, I think you should know that he's in the hospital so I could have a chance to reach out to him. What I want you to know is that something that feels so small as a hello, that begins with one little conversation, can turn into something more and can have a profound impact on somebody's life in such a way that helps them to feel seen and known and loved and cared for and surrounded by a community of people. And when I asked Steve about it, he said, I just did the thing that anybody would do. And I think that's who Jesus is calling us to be. People who show up, people who notice, people who pay attention and live with intention. You know, here at Resurrection, we try and do that. We don't always get it right. I don't always get it right. None of us do. But we have this desire to live differently and to show radical hospitality. And as you leave today, if you want to pick one of these up, you can. But one of the things that we as staff try and live by are kind of rules of radical hospitality. And I'll share with you what these are, because I think it's not just a chance for staff and for volunteers to make sure that you feel welcomed and greeted. It's also a chance to live your life differently. The first thing is to be beyond friendly. So I know we can all be friendly, but what does it take to say, I'm going to do just a little bit more? Just a little bit more. What can I do to help somebody feel like they really matter? The second is this idea that others come first. So we've talked before about how important it is to look someone in the eyes, to have eye contact with them. And this is the one, I'll just say, honestly, maybe sometimes hard for me, and that is to create margin in our life so that when something comes up, we have space to be able to step in and help. Somebody needs help moving. Somebody needs something. We say, I can have space for that. I can fill in. I can say yes. The third is to strive for excellence, and that means what can I do in every way possible to be as present as I possibly can, to notice people and to take action. And I think this is where Steve kind of came in. It's this, okay, I can say hi, but what can I do that is beyond that? And then the last is everybody belongs. And that means assuming that not everybody in the room will think like you do, have the same experiences that you do, and that you are willing to step outside of your own frame of reference to make sure that everybody feels like they belong, and that you see them, that you acknowledge them, and you give thanks for them even when their lives are differently. That you're slow to speak, quick to listen, and abounding in steadfast love. And these may feel a bit like things that maybe we want to live to. They're things that we long to live up to. And slowly but surely we begin to incorporate some of these into our lives, and what we find is that our actions will help to lead us into being the people that Jesus has called us to be. So here's what happens next. Because what I'm going to share with you this really short verse, and that is that once Jesus started living this way and the people began to see it, something transformative happened. And the report of this spread throughout all of the district. In other words, Jesus was just who he was, and people paid attention. And they couldn't stop talking about it. They couldn't stop sharing all the incredible things that they'd seen and they'd witnessed and they'd experienced, because it was so amazing they couldn't stop talking about it. I don't know if you've ever had a bad experience at a restaurant, if you ever found yourself saying, oh, that place wasn't really great, the people weren't super nice. You're about 21% more likely to share about a bad experience than a good one. And it made me think about how often we find that people have negative experiences of the church and of Christians and how they've been hurt. And that doesn't mean that those shouldn't be shared, because they should, because painful experiences are hard. But how often are we doing the opposite and sharing our positive experiences? Sometimes I feel like in my own life too, it can be hard to talk about church because we don't want to offend somebody. We don't want to make them upset. We don't want to make them angry. But if we don't have positive words to share about how our life has been changed and transformed, then people don't know what is possible. They don't know that there's a church community that's welcoming, where everybody belongs, where they can come as they are and be loved and welcomed and experience transformation if we don't say something. And that's precisely what happened for a member of our community, for Mark Welker. He shared his journey with me. He said, my journey started when I came across some of Adam's sermons on YouTube, and I was listening to him on my workouts and thought, I agree with everything this guy says. And he said, up to this point, I was at best a nominally religious person, and I didn't attend church. In fact, I'd openly wondered whether religion had, over the course of history, done more harm than good on balance. And he said, but after a year of listening, I found myself on the cusp of Christmas Eve 2024, and I attended worship here at Resurrection Brookside. And I haven't missed a service unless I've been out of town or sick. And he joined earlier this year. He signed up for the GPS, our Grow Train study guide. He's been attending Disciple Bible Study, the men's group, attended a men's conference, and now I pray 5 times a day, which I haven't done since I was a kid. And this is what I love. He says, when anyone asks me what's new, I tell them I've joined a church. And when they ask about that, he says, I've joined Resurrection, and this is the first church that I've chosen for myself. When I talked with him earlier this week, and I said, so tell me how those conversations usually go after that. And he said, I haven't ever really had someone ask a lot more questions until just about a week ago. He said, I went to the doctor, and for years and years, I've had high blood pressure. But for the first time, my blood pressure was in the normal range. And I was ecstatic. And he said, I started talking to a friend of mine, and I said, you won't believe this. My blood pressure is finally normal at the first time. And he said, I think it has to do with the peace and the joy that I found in the church. And the guy said, well, I feel like I could use some of that. I'd like to come to your church. And he said, we went out to lunch, and we had a conversation, and he said he might come, and I don't know if he's made it here, but I thought, wow. And that all began by him just slowly saying, hey, this is something that's made a difference in my life. And I think you're here because there's something about Christ that has made a difference in your life. And how you made your way here is likely from some sort of invitation, whatever it might have been. And it might have taken multiple invitations before you got to be where you are right now, but I think Christ is inviting us to be those who share because we've seen and experienced a transformation that's happened not only in our lives, but in the lives of those around us and in the life of the community. And it just might be that what somebody else needs is someone to come along that path with them. As we think about these 4 modes of being in the world, as we imagine this idea of self-transcendence, what is worth wanting, what if it meant that for someone else to experience that transcendent experience, what they need is just someone to come alongside of them and help them to see that there might be another way. So now I want to share one final invitation, and that is what it looks like to help others experience that transcendence. The last part of chapter 9 says this: Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And I wonder, what would it look like if you helped to create a space right here at Resurrection Brookside for people to experience transformation, for them to experience the transcendent, for them to experience what it's like to walk into a place, to feel welcome, to feel surrounded with love, to feel like this is a place where I can belong. What would it be like if you said yes, as Jesus said, to invite us to be one of those workers? As I think about what it means to live a life that's new, sometimes it takes us doing something different to experience something different. Maybe you've heard that before, but if I want my life to be different, I have to do something different. If I want my life to feel new, then that means I need to do something new. And that might feel a little scary, a little hard. It might mean saying yes to something that you've never done before, because in doing so, you just might open yourself up to experience something you've never experienced before. As you came in today, you received one of these little cards, and on it are some opportunities to volunteer. And I will say that this church doesn't happen without incredible volunteers, but it's not just about the fact that it doesn't happen without you. It's that lives are changed, like Steve's, like Mark's, like others, when we are willing and we say, I'm willing to step out and do something different. I'm willing to sing. I'm willing to help in the tech booth. I'm willing to make coffee because I love coffee, so I might as well do something I love. And I wonder, what would it look like if you said yes and you just tried it? There are all sorts of reasons why we might not want to do it. All sorts of reasons why we might say, I'm not qualified enough, I don't have the time, it's too late. But what I think Jesus invites us to do is to say, how might I live my life differently? Knowing that I might have to do something new and different to create space in my life for the new thing that's happening within me. And so that's my invitation for you. How might you respond to the thing that's new that's happening in your life by doing something new? By creating a rhythm of your day and of your life that allows for God to work and expand your world in a way that you might never have imagined or expected, and in doing so, others see it. They ask the question about what's happening in your life, and you can joyfully proclaim and share the change that's happening within you, and to see how your life and your rhythm of your daily life is new and helps you to live as Jesus lives. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the new things that you're doing in our life, for the challenges that we have that are stretching us, for the opportunities that are causing us to let go of ways that might be rigid and are no longer serving us, and instead create space to grow, to live our lives anew. May we, in seeking to live into a new rhythm, find our hearts are changed, our lives are transformed, and as they are, others can't help but to notice who we are and wonder how they, too, might live a life like this, a life like you. Amen.